Welcome to After Effects CC Tips, Tricks, and Techniques. My name is David Dodds, and welcome to the exciting world of motion design. Here's a little bit about myself. I'm an animator. I have worked for some of the best studios in the entertainment industry. I'm an author of a book on motion design, and I'm an educator. I teach at UCLA. I teach motion design. Learn more about me at my website right here at www.daviddodds.net. So let's take a look at the course overview. This course is broken up into 5 sections. The first section is called Working with Different File Types, Animating 2D Layers and Text. And the goal for this section is basically to learn the basics of how to edit different layer types. Okay, section 2, applying impressive animations in After Effects. The goal for this section is to get up to speed with different animation techniques. Section 3, animate a variety of data and avatar icons. The goal of section 3 is to use the animation techniques in a real world project. Section 4, 3D layers and camera tracking. The goal behind Section 4 is to understand the fascinating and professional world of 3D and the power of VFX tools, such as camera tracking. And Section 5 creates stunning visual effects. The goal behind Section 5 is to use a variety of visual effects tricks that the professionals use. The prerequisites for this course is a basic understanding of how to use a computer, a copy of Adobe After Effects, Illustrator, Character Animator, and Photoshop, CC 2019. Be determined to learn new After Effects techniques. And optionally, the book Hands On with Motion Graphics with After Effects, CC. And some extra information, each section will have a follow along project. And here are the course goals: create beautiful motion graphics, learn animation techniques, best practices for exporting your videos, create slick type animation, add music to your motion graphics, color correct footage, learn time remapping, and learn motion blur techniques. Without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to Working with Different File Types, Animating 2D Layers and Text. Working with the interface, panels, tools, and the timeline. We are going to create a composition. So go up to Composition, New Composition, 1920 by 1080. Name the comp here. And this is for the transparent background color. It will be 53 seconds. And add a new folder by clicking on this icon here. This keeps the project nice and tidy. So let's move into the comp folder. Reset our workspace here. And to import an image, go to File, Import File, and then bring the image into the timeline. Just drag it down like so. And I'll hit S and scale my image way up. Let's take a tour of the tool panel. In this selection tool lets me move my layer in the composition and edit, undo to undo an action. This is the hand tool, and this allows me to move around in the composition. And this magnifying glass, it lets me zoom in and out of my comp. And this is the zoom tab. So these are the grid options here. This is the screen grab icon. This is the resolution tab to go from a quarter to full. And these are my grid options here. Click to add or remove these options. These eyeballs, they turn on and off your layers. And this is to solo your layers. To duplicate your layers, go to Edit, Duplicate. And to reveal your transform property, select your layer and then twirl down the transform button. And you'll see position, scale, rotation, opacity, and anchor point. And if you scrub the parameters, that will adjust your parameter. Here's a few shortcuts to speed up your workflow. P for position, S for scale, R for rotation, and T for opacity. Take a look at your Layer Color tab. Select this to change your layer's bounding box color. And if you notice, the outline of your layer will correspond with this color here. This makes it easier to find your layers. And this is your Shy button. Turn it on in both of these places and it will temporarily hide anything that you have the Shy button on for. So here's a very quick tour of these buttons on your timeline. Effects button, Motion Blur, 3D, Graph Editor, Parent, and Link. So we will go over these more later. This blue thing, this is called your time indicator. This is how you adjust your workspace area. And if you drag your time indicator to move back and forth in your timeline, that's how you move back and forth in your timeline. And this is how you edit your layers. You trim your layers by hovering over your layer until you see these double-sided arrows, then you trim your layer. Clicking on these triangles lets you zoom into your workspace. And this bar lets you navigate in your workspace. Let's go up here to your preview panel. This allows you to play forward or backward one frame or go to the beginning and end of your timeline. These tools lets you navigate in your project. If you turn on snapping, it will snap to any guides in your project. And this tool allows you to rotate your layer. In the next video, we'll get to grips with After Effects shortcuts. Get to grips with After Effects shortcuts. To enlarge any panel that your mouse is hovering over, hit the tilde key, which is located right under the Escape key. Hitting the V key, that'll allow you to get the selection tool, and that will allow you to move any layer that you have selected in the main composition. Control A selects all layers in the timeline. While your layers are selected, if you hit the U key, that will reveal any parameters that you have animated. Control or Command left or right arrow jumps down one frame down the timeline. Hitting the Enter key while a layer is selected, that allows you to rename that layer. While a layer is selected, hit I to jump to the beginning part of that layer and hit O to jump to the out point of that layer. Hit the letter B to trim the beginning of your workspace. Hit the letter N to trim the end part of your workspace. Click Alt left bracket to trim the beginning of your layer. Click on Alt right bracket to trim the end point of your layer. Hit the letters J and K on the keyboard to jump between any revealed keyframes for your layers. Hit Shift and any of the numbers to create layer markers for your timeline. Hit Shift Control Y to reveal your layer solid settings. In the next video, we will have a look at developing impressive infographics. Developing impressive infographics. For inspiration for my infographic, I'm going to type in infographic on Pinterest. I'm going to start looking through different visually interesting images. The great thing about Pinterest is that it will refer me to other visually similar images. So I can keep scrolling through this and looking at other infographics that are really interesting, and Pinterest will continue to refer me to visually similar infographics. I'm looking for inspiring images, looking for great typography. I'm looking for great graphs, basically any kind of charts or anything Anything that conveys information in a visually interesting way. When I find something I like, I can create a board on Pinterest or I can right click on it and I can save that image. And once again, notice how Pinterest is giving me similar images. Notice how it's giving me lots of images, has this yellow in there and has typography. This really helps with refining my ideas. I keep finding other ideas that are similar to what I want, and I can keep clicking on them, and that will lead me into other ideas that may help refine my ideas more and more. And the great thing about this particular process is that there's no right or wrong answers. It's just looking for things that pull you visually. So I like this image right here. It's really cool how it shows photographic images combined with text. So I'm saving these images and now I'm going to jump into a program called Adobe Bridge. I love, love, love Adobe Bridge because it gives me a way to organize my ideas. One of the great things about Adobe Bridge is you can click on these different buttons up here and view your items in all of these different formats, film strip, essentials, you name it. The other thing I can do is click on my image and then I can assign it a label. And this becomes really helpful when I want to organize my images. I can also rate them. See these little stars down here? I can rate them. And this becomes super, super helpful when you have like 100 images and you need to sort them. In the next video, we will have a look at importing, editing videos, images, and audio. See you then. Importing, editing videos, images, and audio. A video layer or an audio layer is just like any other layer that you can bring into After Effects. Sometimes it has less parameters, but the way you import it is exactly the same. It's fairly simple to import it. Just go to File, Import, File, and then you navigate to where your image, video, or audio is. You can also go and drag your image or your video from, let's say, Bridge. You can drag and drop that into your After Effects project, just like this. Okay, create a folder for that video. Just drag it down to that icon right there. Name your folder. It's good to keep everything organized. Okay, to create a composition out of that video, I'm just going to drag that video down to the new composition icon. Presto, I have a new composition. Take a look. If I drag my playhead, I can see that this is actual video. So that's how you import your video into your project. And that's also how you import images as well. So next, let's import some audio. So the process is exactly the same. Just go to import and navigate to your audio file and hit import. Once I have that audio into my project, I'll do the same thing. I'll drag it and create a folder for my audio. Like I said, it's really important to keep things nice and tidy. So I'll name that audio and then I'll drag that audio folder out of that video folder. Okay, so now I'm in business. So I'm going to drag this audio into my composition, just like this. Okay, so now that I have my audio into my composition, I'm going to select my audio layer and then I will twirl down this little icon right here and see where it says audio and then it says wavelength. That gives me all of my wavelength information, my waveform information. And the waveforms, that's what gives us a visual representation of our audio. So you might notice if I adjust these numbers right here, you can see my audio is reacting to that, and that's how I can animate my audio across time. To trim my video layer, I just drag the layers like so, but you have to make sure you have those double-sided arrows. That's the icon that lets you know you're trimming your layer. So this is one way of how you can trim any layer in After Effects. Another way you can do this is hit Alt, right, or left bracket. In the next video, we'll have a look at working with Illustrator files, best practices. So in this video, we will be working with Illustrator files, best practices, getting your Illustrator files set up to animate in After Effects. Illustrator is a great program for working with vector objects. And this artwork can be scaled infinitely, yet remain its true resolution. I'll bring in files from my Illustrator project. I'll first reset my workspace so the interface is reset to the standard. I'll go to the Window, Workspace, and Reset Essentials. I'll select my individual layers and I'll see where they are in the layer structure. There will be a little color tab next to that layer. I'm selecting the airplane here and I see the layer 3, that's the one with the plane in it. I'm going to drag that out of its layer and I'll name it. This is helpful when I go into After Effects because it will be on its own layer ready to animate. So I will save it out and I will save this in a folder and I'll hit Save OK. I'll jump back into After Effects and I'll navigate to where that is, where I saved that, and I'll choose the comp, Retain Layer Size. That's really important. And also choose Create Composition. And I'll double click the comp that it came in and look at the layers that it came in with. And I'll toggle on and off my transparency. I can change the background for that color and I'll go up there where the composition settings are, right up here, and I'll change it to a better contrasting color. So in this way, I can toggle on and off the solo layers. And this way, I'll toggle these on and off to see how it's assembled. Next, I'll turn on continuously rasterize. That's really important. Turn that continuously rasterize button on and make sure it's at nice, crisp, fully 100% rasterized quality. Okay, next, I'll bring my suitcase into the project I already started that has the video in it. And I'll drag it into the composition like this. Then I'll make sure the continuously rasterize is also turned on in the pre-comp. And so look at this, I can scale this up 100% and it stays fully at 100% quality. So in the next video, we'll have a look at editing 2D layers and time remapping. In this video, we will edit 2D layers and we will work with time remapping. I will move this layer like this. This is how you can trim your layer. Next, I will show you how to add effects to your layer. With this process, it's the same whether you're adding effects to photos or videos or anything. So go over to the effects panel. We will use one effect called Hue Saturation. I'm desaturating my image here. Essentially, that's how you add effects to a layer. Anything that has a stopwatch next to it, you can animate that parameter across time. Now I'll show you how to edit your layer a bit further by going up here and using a mask. I'll go up here and get the ellipse tool, and if I click and drag on it, it will give me a circle mask. This is one of the ways to get transparency for your layer. If you click here, you can lock your mask so you won't edit your mask unintentionally. This is how you change your mask color for more contrast. To bring in a video, simply drag it into the timeline. I'll go up and add Hue Saturation to the layer. I'll next tweak the speed of my video. I'll right-click here and choose Time Remapping. That will give me two keyframes, one in the beginning and one in the end of the layer. And I can adjust the keyframes to get the speed I want. See, this will make it play really fast. I can also add keyframes to slow it down, and I can reverse the keyframes to reverse the video. Next, I'll show you how to freeze frame your video. Right-click on your video layer and choose Freeze Frame. That will freeze frame the video where your time indicator is. It will freeze on that frame in time. In the next video, we will have a look at operating with text and kinetic text effects. In this video, we'll be operating with text and kinetic text effects. We are going to use the powerful Important Text tool. Go up here and choose this tool and start typing. If you look down here, you can see the new layer that's been created with my text on it. If I get the selection tool, I can move my text around. Now, the text tool is just like any other layer in After Effects. I can add effects to it, I can scale it up, I can scale it down, I can animate it. However, it has its own special parameters. I can change the font. I can go here and browse the fonts. I can preview them here. You can adjust your text and make it bold or thin. You can adjust your spacing with this parameter. If you select two letters, you can adjust the spacing between the letters like this. You can click on this and you can give it a stroke. And you can disable your stroke by clicking this. Next, I'll show you how to add text presets to your text. Have your text selected. Go over to the effects panel and type the name of your preset here. Type in the typewriter to get that preset. Once I've clicked it, I will immediately get motion. Press U to reveal the keyframes. I can now adjust the keyframes. If I hit N, that will trim my workspace area. Let's take a look at the text presets that come with After Effects. Click here in the text preset. Also go up here to the animation browse preset. This will open it up in Adobe Bridge. I can navigate through it in Bridge, and it will give me a video preview. But first, I will undo the preset I already added to the text. And I'll jump back into Bridge, and I'll double click on the effects in Bridge, and it will add it inside of After Effects. If your presets don't open up in Adobe Bridge, remember, you can always access your text presets inside of After Effects. In the next section, we will take a look at applying impressive animations in After Effects. Applying impressive animations in After Effects. Editing icons with Illustrator. I'll make this composition 1920 by 1080. I'll name this paint icon and I'll change the duration to 30 seconds. Next, I'll move that composition into the comp folder. And notice I have all these folders created, one that's called comps, images, pre-comps, and solid. This is so that I can stay organized. I'll go up to layer, new solid, and actually I'll make this solid blue. To import an Illustrator file, go to File, Import. Import your file and be sure and choose Import Composition Retain Layer Size and click on Create Composition and hit Import. Double click the pre-comp and then turn on this button right here. That's called Continuously Rasterized. This will ensure your Illustrator file is at full quality. Now I will copy this icon from my composition and then paste it into my comp. I'll briefly jump into shape layers. I'll create a shape object and then I will add an ellipse, add a stroke here, increase my stroke width, and size up my ellipse here. I'll also briefly jump into parenting. I'm going to parent this shape layer to my paint jar icon by grabbing this pick whip and dragging it to my paint jar icon. So now the shape layer will move with the paint jar layer. So now I can continue to edit my shape by clicking on the masking tool right here, and I can just drag that. Or I can go over here and add the fill effect and change the color of my icon. So these are some of the ways you can edit your layer. Another way I can edit my layer is to go into Illustrator. So if I go to Edit and I do Edit Original, and I can change any of the colors here in Illustrator, and it will automatically update when I save it. It will update it inside of After Effects. In the next video, we will have a look at Easy Ease and the Graph Editor. Easy Ease and the Graph Editor. To animate anything, first you need to understand the timeline. This is the timeline. The numbers here on the timeline represents where you are in time. Action moves from the left to the right on the timeline. The workspace represents the length of your video. This blue pick, this is the time indicator, and that tells you where you are in the timeline. Okay, here are the steps to animate anything in After Effects. First, go to the point in the timeline where you want the animation to start. Find the parameter you want to change over time, and any parameter with a stopwatch can be animated. Hit the stopwatch icon and move down in the timeline and adjust that parameter. Adjust your workspace area and hit the spacebar to preview your animation. So those are the basic steps for animation. Next, let's go over how to apply Easy Ease to your animation. Realistic movements have some kind of ease to them. So select the keyframes, right-click on the frames, and choose Easy Ease. Now your keyframes will be nice and smooth. Next, I'd like to introduce you to the Graph Editor to further adjust your keyframes. And this is what makes a really good animator, is knowing how to further to create realistic, elegant animations. Click on this graph icon, and this reveals your keyframes graphically. We are going to adjust the speed graph. So click this and choose Edit Speed Graph. Adjust these handles. This slope indicates the ease of your animation. The greater the slope, the more the ease. In the next video, we will have a look at applying motion blur to achieve a real-world effect. Applying motion blur to achieve real-world effects. Let's discuss what motion blur is and how to enable it. Motion blur is the visual distortion created by movement of layers in the composition. When a layer contains keyframes, consider adding motion blur to that layer. It makes your movements look more realistic. Turn on the Enable Motion Blur button right here and select motion blur for that layer. The blur adjusts each time you adjust your animation or additional keyframes. Remember, the greater the speed of your animation, the greater the motion blur. Next, we'll have a look at tips and tricks to quickly offset layers. Make sure your layers are at the length you want them to be. Select the layers in the order you want them to be offset. Go up here to Animation and choose Keyframe Assistance and Sequence Layers. And you can choose to overlap your layers, but for this example, I won't choose that. Okay, so now let's preview. This can be used for frame-by-frame animation or for sequencing through a bunch of photos. In the next video, we will have a look at adding anticipation and overshoot. Adding anticipation and overshoot. It's important to understand what anticipation and overshoot is. These are animation terms and techniques. Real moving objects typically have these behaviors. Anticipation happens before a move. To add anticipation to your movement here, simply adjust your keyframes and move down the timeline to an earlier part in the timeline and create a blank keyframe to hold the current position. Then add an opposite keyframe after that. So the goal here is for your action to move in the opposite direction, then go back and go into the final move. This is a good example of an anticipation movement. Overshoot happens at the end of a movement. So go down to the timeline to the last keyframe and then go back a few keyframes like this. Add a keyframe here to create an additional movement going past the current position it's in. So reset your workspace area and preview. This is an anticipation and overshoot move. Feel free to adjust your keyframes as needed. In the next video, we will have a look at squash and stretch. Squash and stretch. So to start this process, we're going to go to New and then choose Shape Layer. Next, we'll go to Add and we'll create an ellipse. So increase the size for the ellipse right here. Next, I'll go to Add and we will add a fill to that ellipse. And right here, you can change the color for your ellipse. Okay, then I will add a stroke here and adjust the size of the stroke. Next, get the pan behind tool and move the anchor point to the bottom of the ellipse. Okay, I'm going to move the ellipse up here, and this is where I'll start my animation. I'll make a keyframe for position up here, then move down in the timeline, and then I will just move the ellipse going in a down motion like this. So we want like a zigzag type of motion, so it's going down and then it's bouncing back up like this. And then I will move it back down like this. And move down the timeline and then move back up like that. Maybe not up that high, maybe right about there. So I'll move down a little bit more in the timeline and then move the ball so it lands right about here. Okay, so let's preview that motion. Okay, so it's looking okay. So now what I need to do is adjust the parameters here so it looks a little bit better. What I'd like to introduce you guys to is something called squash and stretch. So let me turn off my scale linking parameter. So this way I can squash the shape without it being squashing equally all the way around. So I'm going to move down a little bit in the timeline. When I get to that middle keyframe right here, I'm going to adjust this parameter right here. So notice how it squashes. And I can even use these little handles right here to squash the shape a little bit more. So what it's going to do is move down, and then as it gets down to the bottom of the composition, it's going to squash. And now I want to create an additional shape like this. So it's an extreme movement. So notice how it is squashing as it's moving down. And then once it gets down to the bottom, it completely squashes. So it gives you the ability to do different types of squashes. So I'm going to copy those keyframes for scale, move down in the timeline to right here where the ball is landing on the ground again, and then I'm going to adjust the keyframe so it squashes right as it hits the bottom. So I can paste those keyframes right here and then just adjust it exactly like I did the previous keyframes. Okay, so take a look at that. So that's essentially how you do some squash and stretch. Okay, so now I am going to use the Bezier tool right here to adjust my path. So this will make my ball go in more of a rounded path at the top of the movement. So it'll give it a little bit more of a realistic move. Okay, the next thing I'll do is ease all my keyframes. So just select the keyframe and choose Easy Ease. So I'm just easing the position keyframes. I also turned on my motion blur for this. So if I click on this icon, this allows me to edit my graph editor, my speed graph editor. Right here, I'm editing my speed graph. So just clicking on these handles right here allows me to adjust my speed for my movement. The higher the peak, the faster the movement. The lower the peak or the lower the arc, that means it'll be moving slower. Okay, so that's how you create a ball bounce with squash and stretch and easy ease. And so just spend a little bit of time adjusting your graph editor to make sure that your motion is nice and elegant. In the next section, we'll have a look at ways to animate a variety of data and avatar icons. Animate a variety of data and avatar icons. Animating infographic icons. Let's animate these icons popping up and rotating with anticipation and overshoot. First, position our icon in our composition. Be sure your anchor point is in the center of the object. Use the pan behind tool to move your anchor point. Your object animates and transforms around this point. Move where we want our icon to end up. Hit the stopwatch for scale. Next, we'll go back in time and scale our icon down to 0. Let's overshoot our scale position at the midpoint. Scale it way up. Next, let's animate the rotation. Create a blank rotation keyframe here and go down to the last keyframe. Create a blank rotation keyframe. In order to create the overshoot, jump back to the midpoint and rotate this parameter. Okay, let's preview. Now repeat that for the rest of the icons. Add our scale keyframes and our overshoot keyframes in the middle of these keyframes. Repeat this step for the rotation keyframes. Now let's select the keyframes and add Easy Ease for all these keyframes. Let's preview. In the next video, we will have a look at animating with the puppet tool. Animating with the puppet tool. The puppet tool creates a mesh for your layers and gives you the ability to animate points in it. It's wise to separate out the layers you want to animate in Illustrator, Photoshop, or After Effects before using the puppet tool. So let's use the puppet tool to pose our creature. Select the layer we want to affect. The puppet tool is located up here. Go right before the point in the timeline you want the motion to start. Click to add the puppet tool on your layer. Look at the keyframes generated. Hit U to reveal the keyframes. Simply pose the arm like so. Let's animate the tail wagging. This process is the same as we did with the arms, except we're going to move down in the timeline and we will adjust this point here. So repeat this process a couple times of moving down the timeline and adjusting the point. I'm going to animate the hand as well. I will adjust the hand. I'll move down in the timeline. Just move this first puppet point. I'll move down in the timeline and create another movement with the point. And next, I'll select all my keyframes and right-click and then choose Keyframe Assistant. Choose Easy Ease. In the next video, we'll have a look at animating avatar icons with Adobe Character Animator. Animating avatar icons with Adobe Character Animator. We are going to work with Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Character Animator. Character Animator is a powerful web-based animation tool. Open Character Animator, save your project. You might want to write down or remember this file path. You will need it later. Go to the Home tab and open the Illustrator face template. Be sure it's the Illustrator file. Go to Edit Original, and let's customize this face. I'll spend a little time customizing this face. I'll speed up this process just a little bit. I have elements I've already created in another Illustrator file, and I'll copy and paste these elements from one file to another. The important thing is to keep the folder hierarchy exactly the same. These template puppets that ship with Character Animator are meant to be edited. As you can see with the face, it's easy to switch out the artwork. For example, I've replaced the face shape, the eyes, and the hair. Now I'm adjusting all the mouth shapes so that they are aligned with the face. Be sure your file structure looks like this. Save it and jump back into Character Animator. Click this button right here, the Set Reset pose. Click on the webcam icon and the mic. Your face will now talk when you talk. Let's animate a bit of dialogue. Hit the red button to start recording. Now it's showtime. Remember, this is a performance-based animation tool. I'll hit the stop button here now. Look at these mouth shapes that it created, and they can be edited. If I'm happy with my performance, I can hit play, this button right here, and then I can jump back into After Effects. Return to where you saved your character file. Remember I said that file path is important, and import your character animator file. Choose the scene you created, drag that character animator file into your project, and you can adjust your character animator file just like you would any other layer in After Effects. And you can always make changes in Adobe Illustrator and Character Animator. Just remember that you need to save your changes and your layers will update right away. In the next video, we will have a look at working with null objects and parenting. Working with null objects and parenting. Parenting is the process of setting up multiple layers so that the movement of the layers, the child, it follows the movement of another layer, the parent. Make sure your anchor points are in the correct place. I'm going to move these anchor points to the shoulder area so the arm can rotate around the shoulder area. Use the pick whip to establish parent layers. Just drag the pick whip for the child layer to the layer you want to be the parent layer. The child will follow the parent, but the child has autonomy. I'll also parent this layer to the body. So everything will follow the body parent layer. I also have to parent the head to the body parent layer. I'll select the head layer, drag this pick whip to the body layer so you can see the limbs follow the body. I can rotate these independently, but they will still follow the body, the parent. I'll animate the body scaling up here and ease these keyframes. Next, we will work with a null layer. Null layers are invisible layers that has all the properties of visible layers, so it can be apparent to any layer in the composition. This is great for adjusting and animating large numbers of layers. To create a null layer, go to the layer, go to New Null Object, and we will parent our body layer to this null layer. Now, this will follow the null. I'll animate the arm waving while the creature is scaling up. I'll animate it going across the screen with the null object. In the next video, we will have a look at grouping your layers with pre-composing. Grouping and pre-composing. Pre-comps are ideal when you have a ton of layers and you want to quickly group them. Simply select your layers and choose Pre-comp. From this menu, select Move All Attributes into New Composition and give your pre-comp a name. Double-click on that to go into the pre-comp. Essentially, a pre-comp is a folder or a composition. It's made up of all your elements that you selected. So sometimes instead of calling something a pre-composition, it's called a pre-comp. So that's just some short lingo, some short motion graphic lingo for you. Okay, in the next section, we will have a look at animating lines and pie charts. Animate lines and pie charts. To start, create a solid layer. Add a path here with the pen tool. Next, we will add a stroke effect. Choose On Transparent. Adjust the width of the stroke and go to the point in the timeline when you want the stroke to start. Adjust it here so it disappears and create a keyframe for that. Move down a few keyframes and adjust this parameter. Animate the stroke coming on. To animate our pie chart, choose the layer that we will animate to either increase or decrease our pie chart. Add the radial wipe effect. And adjust this wipe center. Adjust the effect so that you're at the starting point you want for your chart. Create a keyframe here and move down the timeline. Adjust your keyframe parameters. In the next video, we will have a look at animating bar graphs and maps. Animate bar graphs and maps. To animate our bar graphs, choose our layer we will animate to either increase or decrease our bar graph. Add the linear wipe effect. Adjust the angle. And when you do this, it comes with keyframes for you to adjust. Copy the effect to the bars. I'll keep pasting the effects to all these other layers. In order to paste the effect, find where it says linear wipe, copy that, and paste that in onto the other layers. It should paste with the keyframes. After you've pasted the effect, we will adjust the keyframes and ease our keyframes like we've been doing in subsequent videos. Get in the habit of easing all your keyframes and saving your work. Let's do a quick preview. It's looking good. So we're going to animate the line of our graph next. So add a solid and add a line to the solid with a pen tool, and then add the stroke effect. Then select On Transparent and adjust the brush size and increase the spacing. Adjust the color for the stroke and animate the line coming on. Hit the keyframe for the stopwatch end position here. Move down the timeline and increase the end position to 100%. Add a null object to my scene. Then I'll select both of these layers and parent them to the null object. I'll hit the stopwatch scale, then I'll move back in time. I'll scale this down a little bit here, so I'll have some constant movement in this piece. Then I'll scale this up just a little bit here. Then I'll preview. So this is looking great. So we have a constant move with this animation. These lines are constantly editable. So remember that I can adjust the path like this. So it looks like it's animating across the map like this. Remember, these are constantly editable. This type of project can be used in so many different things like infographics. In the next section, we will have a look at 3D layers and camera tracking. 3D layers and camera tracking. In this video, we are going over expressions. Expressions are bits of script you can add to any of your parameters that have a stopwatch. To add an expression, alt-click on a stopwatch, type wiggle, parenthesis, enter a number, then a comma, and another number, and then end it with another parenthesis. Now, if you get an error message, that means you have typed the expression incorrectly. So once again, to add an expression, alt-click on a stopwatch, type wiggle, parenthesis, enter a number, then a comma, and then another number and another parenthesis. If you get an error message, that means you have typed the expression incorrectly. So what that will do is add a slight wiggle movement to the parameter. Expressions are a bit of script that adds a little bit of movement to that parameter. And you can go online and look up different expressions and then copy them and just paste them directly into your parameter and experiment with it. Let's add this expression to another parameter. So let's delete this expression and add it to another parameter. So let's copy it first, then we'll delete it. We'll alt-click on the position parameter and paste it here. And I can adjust this parameter at any time. So you can add expressions to almost any parameter that has a stopwatch. And this can be really useful if you want to add some subtle movement to an object and keep it moving throughout the entire video. Okay, so next up, we will dive deep into the exciting world of 3D. Okay, everyone, so we are going to dive into 3D world in After Effects. So 3D in After Effects is not full 3D, it's called 2.5D. So that's what we're going to work on today. So in order to get started with 3D, we are going to create a new solid layer. So I'll go to Layer, New, Solid. Okay, so I'm going to type in my text here, info. Okay, so I'll adjust that, put that in the right place, and then I'm going to turn on the 3D icon right here. So now, if I look at my different views, I can see that now my layer is in 3D space. Okay, I'm going to adjust that, my transparency here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so I can see what I'm working with. And I can adjust these parameters as needed. I think the way I'm going to do this actually is I'm going to duplicate this layer, the info layer, and I'm going to type in stats. So I'm going to type in a different word there, and I'm going to adjust that in space. So if I grab this handle right here, that allows me to push that layer back in 3D space. And as you can see, it's on the Z axis. And now I'm going to switch back to the one view. So you can switch as needed to different views so that you can adjust your 3D layer in space as needed. So I'm going to move that a little bit closer to this other text because what I'm going to do is rotate it. So I'm going to choose well, not that one. I'm going to choose this one on the X rotation, and I'm going to rotate it like so. So I want it to, what I'm going to create is like a 3D object. So it'll have like a corner to it. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Layer, New, Null Object. And I'll select both of these. I'm going to make the null object 3D, and then I'm going to select both of these text layers and parent it to the null object. So now I can adjust the null object and it will move both of those layers. How cool is that? And it is in real 3D, well, 2.5D space. Okay, so now I can adjust these layers so that I can get them just as I want them. So I'm going to move the stat layer, the stat text layer a little bit, and then I can adjust the null object as well. And I can rotate it like this. And see, so it's like an actual 3D object. It's moving in After Effects' 3D space. And I can rotate it as well and scale that up as well. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time tweaking my settings here for this text layer. Right now, I just want this to be touching that other text, and I want it to be at a nice angle like so. So spend some time adjusting your text so that it looks good to you. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here rotating my null object. Now the next thing I'm going to do is tweak the anchor point by using the pan tool so that it will be rotating around the center point of that text. Okay, so now when I rotate it, I'm going to move around that anchor point. So now I'm going to hit the Z stopwatch for the rotation, move down in the timeline, and just do a simple movement so that this text is rotating. So I'll select both of those keyframes and make them easy eased. Okay, so we have a nice little rotation effect, and I'll make sure I have the motion blur turned on for those layers. There we go. So I am also going to add a position keyframe for this. So I want this text to drop in and then I'm going to have my rotation. So I'll just adjust that keyframe like that. So the position, so it's dropping in, and then I'll hit keyframe easy ease. Boom. So now it's going to drop into place and then it will rotate. Okay, so have fun with this tool. Next up, we are going to be working with camera tracking. Okay, so in this video, we are going to get into camera tracking. Camera tracking is a way that you can take video footage and add an effect on it called camera tracker, and it will track the movement in 3D space in that video. And then you can add text to it, you can add objects to it, and it will track in 3D space with your camera movement. Okay, so I recommend using footage that's stable. Don't use footage that is really jerky. Okay, so to get started, we are going to bring in our footage and just take your footage and we want to make a composition out of the footage. So just drag your footage down into the create the composition, just like so. And this footage is basically, we're going to trim this footage because we don't need to track the entirety of it. I will trim my workspace area and I'll go to right about there, and then I'm going to trim the footage right there and then trim my workspace. Okay, so this is what we're working with. We are going to track this footage right here. So let's go into our effects and let's type in 3D camera tracker. And I'll double click on that and add that to my footage. And as soon as I add it to the footage, it will start tracking and analyzing the background. What it's looking for is good edges, good contrast that it will track in 3D space. and you can follow along and look at where it's at in the process. Usually it'll say how many frames are left. And when it's solved, you will get message that's saying it's solving the camera and you will see these track points. And these track points represent different areas you can create a good target for it. So what we're looking for is a good straight on target like that, something that looks fairly stable and is facing the right direction. So I'll right click on that and I'll choose create solid in camera and you'll get something like that. And this solid, I can then use that as sort of like a null and I can adjust this solid if I need to. So I might want to just rotate it just a little bit because I know what I want to put in there and I want it to be angled slightly different. Okay, so once I have that in the right position, so I'm going to go and choose layer, new text layer, and I'm going to type in some text. But this could be anything. You could use any object that you want to then attach it to your solid layer. And the great thing is that it will be moving in 3D space. Okay, so I'm going to type in the word play and I'm going to attach that to this solid. So first I'm going to also make the play a 3D layer and I'm going to take this, I'm going to pick whip the text to that solid layer. We might adjust this just a little bit. Okay. And so now that it is parented to that solid layer, that means it will track in 3D space. I'm going to change the color of my text and I'm going to add a little bit of stroke to it. So since this is now parented to that solid, you can treat it just like you would treat any other layer. You can add any changes to it that you want to it and it will track with that solid. So like I said, this can be great for adding text. You could even add video to it. You could add a character in there. You could add any object that you want and it will track in 3D space. See, look at that. So it looks like it's tracked. It's part of that video. You may want to spend a little bit of time doing some color correction and maybe doing some compositing to make it feel like it belongs in that space. But that's how you do tracked footage. So in the next video, we are going to go over render and export settings from Adobe Media Encoder. Okay, in this video, we are going to Adobe Media Encoder. So I'm going to start with my project here and I'll go to Composition, Add Composition to Adobe Media Encoder. Adobe Media Encoder, which is a second program that allows you to render out of your After Effects project. And the great thing about it is you can still work on your After Effects project while it's rendering. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is click on this right here where it says H.264. That is a setting that will compress your video, and I find that that's a good setting to render my project in. But if you click on that, that will give you other options. So if I move this, I can change this to work area. So that means it will only render my work area. I could also choose entire composition. And I can move this playhead here and then I can see here that this is just going to render this section right here. Okay, and it tells me my estimated file size. So that is great thing about Adobe Media Encoder. You can adjust it. So I can choose my target bit rate and I can also choose my maximum rate and then that will change the size of my file. So I can decrease that or increase it to get just the right setting so that my file size won't be too big. So if I hit OK, that will add it to my queue. I can click on this and this will allow me to add some other changes if I want. I'll close that out. Let me look at this and I can take a look at all of these different settings here. YouTube settings, there's all different types of settings. This really depends on what you need it for, but it's good to know that these are here. Okay, so if I click on this right here, that will allow me to go and decide where I want my file saved at. So if I click on this right here, this folder, it will allow me to go into whatever folder I want to go into, and I can just save it out there. Okay, so that is how you use Adobe Media Encoder. Okay, be sure and click on that green triangle to start your render. In the next section, we'll have a look at creating stunning visual effects. Okay, so we are going to work with create stunning visual effects, motion tracking. And we've already learned how to do 3D camera tracking, but this is another way that you can track your motion in a video project. Okay, so to get started with this, you need to have some good steady video. To use the motion tracker, I'll have to select the effect for motion tracking. That can be found up at the top. If you look up here where it says animation, if you go down there, it says track motion. That's what we want to use. So if you double click on that, you'll get this panel right here, and that gives you access to the track motion parameter. So click on track motion, and you'll get these track options right here. And if you click on this, you can adjust your parameters. So this would be your outside boundary area. So nothing, this is basically saying that you don't want your track to go anywhere outside of that outer area. The inner area, that's the actual track point. So that's why you see that magnifying, it's like a magnifying glass because that's the actual point that you're tracking. So it just kind of gives your track, the track process, it gives it boundaries of what it's looking for. So what the track motion is doing, it's really trying to analyze the footage and you're giving it a specific target. Okay, so I'm going to go to the beginning of the timeline of where I want the track to start. And I'm also going to go up here to layer new solid. And this is what I'm going to use to be my target. So I click on edit target right there. I will then choose the dark solid and I'll hit OK. And then it's going to basically be tracking forward from the beginning. And then when it's all done, I'll make it so that it will track that. So I'll hit analyze forward, and basically that's going to analyze the footage going forward. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit so you don't have to watch the whole process. But basically, what it's going to do is it's going to track that center point moving forward. And as you can see, the time indicator there, it's moving, so that means it's tracking along the way. When it's done, it'll reveal these keyframes that it's made. So it's basically making these keyframes for me, which then I can parent something to. So I'll hit stop when I'm done with this, and it's going to be applied to the X and the Y. We're going to just be doing going left or right. So just the position. Okay, so I can turn off that solid because I really am just going to use that as kind of like a null object, and I'm going to parent something to that. So I'll go up here and type something with the type tool. So let me type my word in, and then I'm going to take that layer and I'm going to parent it to the solid layer, which that has all the keyframes on it and that has been tracked. And so now if we play this, you'll see that the sports logo, that sports text is basically following that track motion. So I like to do a solid because then I can parent different things to it if I want. It's just like a null object that I'm using for this. Okay, so that's how you track your motion with the track motion tracker in After Effects. Okay, so next up, we are going to go over best practices for fixing color banding. Okay, so in this video, we are going to address a common problem, which is dealing with this banding look. So let's go over some of the best practices for handling that. What do you do when you get footage or you get image that looks like this? How do you fix that banding? Well, there's a couple ways you can fix it. One thing you can do is If you look over to the left in the project panel, if you look in the bottom, there is it says 8-bit, so you can change that to make it 32-bit. And sometimes that will fix the problem. But if that doesn't fix it, then we have to move on to another option. So let's go into our effects and we're going to type in blur and let's look for something called fast box blur. If you click on that and then you click on where it says repeat edge pixels and you adjust the blur radius and the iteration. So maybe put 1 for both of those. That should smooth out your banding. So that's one way to fix it. Another thing you can do is type in the effect, go into your effect panel and type in something called noise. Noise is another way that you can fix that. So if you double click on that effect and add that to your footage, you can also adjust that. And you may need to play with both of them. You might want to do a little bit of blur and a little bit of noise. And it's just to get rid of that banding on your image. Next up, we will work on organic camera motion. Okay, so in this video, we're going to get a little deeper into 3D. We're going to get into camera animation. So to get started, first, we need to make our layers in our project 3D. And as you can see, that gives me that additional parameter of X, Y, and Z. I can adjust where it's at in space by adjusting the position right there. And as you can see, it's moving closer and further away to the camera. Okay, and I've also turned this on so I'll have two different views. And that just makes it easier so I can adjust my layer in space. So, and once again, this is 2.5D. Okay, so if I go up to edit, I can choose duplicate and I'm going to duplicate that layer of my buildings and I'm going to just push it way back in space like that. So if you can just use those handles right there that has the Z next to it and that you can use that to push things forward and push it back into space like so. So what I'm doing is trying to create a little bit of distance between my layers so I can then use a parallax. I can put a camera in there and then push through in space. Okay, so I have my layers here selected. I'll go up to layer new. Actually, before I do that, let me duplicate that layer again. So I'm going to just duplicate that layer. So I'll have a little bit more here to play with in 3D space. So I'm going to choose one view. And as you can see, my layers are now pushed back in space. So let me select my comp here. I'll go up to layer, new, and I'll choose camera. And clicking on that, that will give me this camera. And that is an actual real camera that if I go up and choose these tools here, I can then push and orbit in space. There is one thing that I need to do with these 3D, well, there's a couple things I need to do. First off, I need to make them all continuously rasterized. That way they won't be blurry when I move closer into the scene. So now look, see how they're nice and crisp? So that's important to always make sure your Illustrator files are fully rasterized. Okay, so I have my layers selected here and I can push in, I can see parallax with that. So I want to adjust the distance here between my layers so that they're not so much distance between them. So if I choose this tool now, I can push in and there's actually buildings in between them. So the next tool I want to choose, let me choose my camera here. Oh, the next thing I want to do is turn on my auto orient. I want to make sure auto orient is turned off. And that way, the camera, when I use these camera tools, all my layers won't be trying to orient themselves to the camera. Okay, so now I am going to just spend a little bit of time adjusting my view here. There we go. So I want something like that. So you can see the distance between the layers and you can actually see that things are being adjusted in 3D space. And you can hit the letter C while you have the camera tool selected, and that will basically cycle through all of those different camera tools. And I would suggest just playing around with them to see what all those different tools do. One of the tools allows you to zoom in and out of your scene. The other one allows you to move left and right. There's another one that allows you to orient, so you're able to fly above your scene and orient around it in a really cool way. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is set a keyframe for a position because I know what I want to do is zoom in to my scene. So I just move down in the timeline and then use the camera tool to basically push into my scene. Let me make that fit to screen. Okay, I'm liking how that's looking. Pretty good. And I'll just do a RAM preview to see what animation that I have. And as you can see, as we push into that last building, there's a lot of blank space there. So what I'll probably do is just duplicate some of my layers and fill it in. And so this is a really good tool to know how to use the camera tool because you can use anything for your 3D layers. You could use videos, you could use JPEG, so you could cut out people, bring them in, and instead of it being buildings, you'll actually be pushing through a series of different people or any kind of JPEG file you can do. There's a lot of different things you can do with this. And then another thing you could do is animate those layers as well. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is adjust my layers. There's layers that fill in the spaces so it's not just blank space in between the buildings. But yeah, you can use this for a lot of different things. And this is a pretty simple, straightforward camera move, but you could do additional movements as well. With this move, I really wanted to do realistic camera move, something that's pretty steady, a steady push in. I think it's best to have as few keyframes as possible. I would say just across the board with any of your animation. You want to get by with as few keyframes as possible. So the next thing I'm going to do is easy ease all those keyframes and turn on the graph editor. Let me zoom in there and then I can go and adjust my graph editor. Let me make sure I'm on speed graph. Yes, I'm adjusting the speed. So I'll click on this and I can adjust my graph editor like so. And once again, the curve means that it's easing. And then the slope actually means it's going down slower and the ease is going to be even more gradual as your slope goes down. So you can just play with this with the editing tool with the editor and adjust your handles to get a movement that feels very elegant. What I want with this movement, I want it to slowly ease into that last keyframe. And that's what these little dots mean. The dot right there at the end of this graph editor right here, that means that that is your keyframe. Okay, so we have a nice move that ramps up and then it slowly eases into a move. Okay, so that is camera animation in After Effects. Next up, useful practices in color correction. Okay, so in this video, we are going to go over some best practices for color correction. So let's take a look at this footage that I have here. My first go-to for doing color correction is just to go to the effects panel and I'll type in curves. Curves is my first go-to. And it works pretty much like it works in Photoshop. If I look at this image, I can see some areas that I might like to correct. So the first thing I do is just adjust the curves like so. And then I can play with my different values. Typically, I'll try to make the darks a little bit darker and make the lights a little bit lighter. The lower part of this curve adjusts the darker part of my image, and the upper part of the curve adjusts the whites or the bright parts of my image. So that's how it looks before and after, before and after. And I can reset this and play with it a little bit more. And these are all constantly editable. It's totally non-destructive editing with color correction, which is great because you're not committed to a particular change. So take a look at this before and after. It's very subtle. I don't want to get rid of the lights here. Okay, so the other thing is I can adjust the blue values or the red values. So if I click on blue, I can then bring a little bit more blue into the image. I can also go and adjust the reds here. So it's a great way to edit. And like I said, these are all totally editable. And these values are adjusting just the reds, just the blues. Okay, so the next color correction tool I'm going to use is hue saturation. So I'll double click on that. And I can immediately adjusting the U, the master U value. And so that is a way that I can change individual U value in my image. Okay, so just rotate this to find a good value that works for your image. And if it has a stopwatch next to it, remember it can be animated across time. And I can move this lever to adjust my master saturation on my image. Okay, so if I go up here and hit the reset button for curves, that will totally reset the curves. Let me turn it on. And then I can adjust the values here by moving the curve like this. So I can turn this on, turn it off, just to kind of get a sense of what corrections I've made so far. And as you can see, these effects can be layered as well. I'll turn these off and go and search for another effect that I'd like to demonstrate. And this one is called levels. Levels is a quicker way to adjust your blacks and whites, to crush your levels so that you have really strong contrast between your blacks and your whites. And this is the midpoint that I can adjust. So I can turn that on, turn that off to get a sense of how this is looking so far. I can reset it and try it again. Okay, so I'm going to turn that effect off and I'm going to go here and look up another effect here called photo filter. And this just gives I can apply this to my video to give my image or my video an overall look, a mood. So I can adjust the density to determine how much it blends in with the image. And I can also go and change my different filter. I can choose a cooling filter. If I want to cool it off, I can choose a deep red, a deep blue, whatever I want. And remember, if it has a stopwatch next to it, it can be animated. You can even adjust the density to increase and give the image more or less of the effect. Okay, I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to choose another color correction called vibrance. And vibrance is a great one because it basically just makes your image pop more. It brings out the blues, it brings out the greens. So this is a quick tour of how to do color correction in your After Effects project. In the next video, we will learn how to explode text in After Effects. Hi, so we are back and we are going to work on this explosion effect in After Effects. So we're going to start off with a new solid in our composition, and I'm just going to use black. And let me fit my screen here. And then I'm going to go to layer and I'm going to choose new text. And I will create some text for my explosion. I'm just going to choose a number, but you're free to use whatever you want. Okay, so I'll scale this up a little bit and center it. Okay, I'm going to change my stroke on this. I just want this to be a plain number without a stroke, and I'm going to change the color to white. And I'm going to go over here to my effects and I'll type shatter. And shatter is one of the free effects that comes with After Effects, and it's basically a particle system. So I'll type that in, double click on that while my layer is selected, and that will add it to my layer. Now, immediately when I add it, you can see it gives me this wireframe view. I'm going to trim my workspace area. It gives me this wireframe view, which is a great view to work on while you're getting your shatter to operate exactly how you want it, because it can be a memory hog. So you want to work in the wireframe mode as long as possible to get everything set up. And then when you feel like it's pretty close, then you can make it to full. Okay, so I'm going to go here to the shape and change this to glass. And that is the effect that I want. You could choose, you could use any of those. There were quite a few different ones, but I'm going to use glass. And if I preview this, you can see I'm already getting some kind of movement. So it will look like it is shattering. And this is just the beginning. I can definitely tweak this to get something that I want. I'm going to choose my repetitions and I'm going to increase that. Gives me more pieces. And I'll make sure this is fit to screen. And like I said, you can tweak it to make it so it looks like it has more pieces. With these particle effects, the trick is you need to just keep tweaking the parameters to get something that you want. Whoa, okay, so that's too many. I typed in 200. That's way too many. I think where it was at before was closer to what I want, but it all depends on the look you're going for. So typically these particle effects work, these particle systems work in the way that you have to keep tweaking the effects and also having some understanding of the physics of what is happening. So it has its own system, its own physics system in this effect. So it has a actual gravity that makes it fall. Okay, so this is the rendered effect. So that's how it's going to look when I actually render it. But like I said, it does take up a lot of memory. So I'm going to turn that back to wireframe and I'm going to adjust the extrusion depth. So this right here, this gives you more 3D effect or less 3D. I want mine to be less 3D. I think it looks a little bit more believable since my number is not a 3D, it's not an actual 3D letter or number. So that looks better to me like that. And like I said, it has its own physics system. So it has a lighting system, it has a gravity system, and all of these things can be tweaked to get just the right look. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Okay, so I am going to duplicate this number, and this is just so that I can have a little bit of lead in before the shatter happens. So I'll duplicate that. And I also need to trim that layer so it will end when the shatter layer starts. So spend some time tweaking these settings right here. I'm going to adjust mine just a little bit to make my shatter happen and then also make the pieces twirl a little bit more, give them more randomness, and adjust the gravity settings. Okay, so that is how you use the shatter effect. And you can feel free to use this on any kind of footage. It can be used on video, it can be used on photos, it can be used in conjunction with lots of other effects. Okay, this was the final video of the course. I hope you enjoyed the course. Thank you for watching.